Hello, silly people, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Trey, and today we are continuing with our 100-day march, a challenge to make a 24-page comic in the span of 100 days. So today we're going to go over, checking the schedule, we have the month of April. This is week 6. So week 6, the 15th, over pencils for page 2, layouts for comics, and text, all in Clip Studio Paint. But this should work in other programs like Photoshop and whatnot. Anything with layers, I think, is able to make a comic. Week 6. Let's get started. All right, so first let's start off with talking about paneling and text bubbles, and all of the things that make an actual comic. So this will be a short demo. I've done this before. I'll leave a link in the description of a more in-depth version of this whole process thing. And I'll also leave links to others where I learned from. Let's start with, this is Clip Studio Paint. This can be also done in Photoshop and I think other programs that has layers and whatnot, but I like Clip Studio Paint because it makes things much easier for myself. So I have Clip Studio Paint open, and I go to new, and new, there is these icons on this top level. And so there's illustration, there's a simple comics tab, a fanzine, show all comic settings. Show all comic settings is the one I mostly use. And there's this whole bunch of information that I have adjusted for my own use. And you can take a screenshot for your own purposes if you want to have something to model off of. But the width is 7, height 10.75, resolution very large at 1200. They say 300 is if you want to print things, or 600 if you want to be safe. But I go way beyond that just in case. But we usually shrink things down in the printing, or it could just stay digital and you won't have to worry too much about this. Paper color, white, comic setting, binding, finished size, width 6.63, height 10.25, bleed width 0.13, the default border inner size, width 6.13, height 9.75, X offset and Y offset are both 0. But here at the bottom is something that I think is very important, and that is multiple pages. If I uncheck that, there's nothing, but check it, and it'll be the number of pages for your comic. So say you're making a 4-page comic, there is 4. For a 24-page comic, there is 24. So it's divisible by 4. But let's do just a demo on a 4-pager. Combine it to a 2-page spread, which is what you see here, a 2-page spread. Binding point is from the left binding, and start page is from the right. And so I click page 1, which is a right-hand page. So it goes right-hand page, and left, right, left. And that's how we in the West read comics, from left to right. In the Asian countries or territories, it reads from right to left. But I like to bring my pages off to the side and shrink that so that I have the slim vertical on my pages, in the center a large page. Over on the far left, there is these tool icons. And we go down to near the bottom, there is a page, and it's like cut in diagonal, and that is the frame borders. Its shortcut is U. U. And up top there is create frame, which we will be using, and I usually keep it on a rectangular frame, but also cut frame, folders, and divide frame borders. I usually use divide frame folders, and I'll show you why in just a moment. But make sure that's checked. And then it create frame, rectangular frame, touch into the page. And then there's these guidelines. And then the innermost one, I touch the corner, and I have in view snap to special rulers, and with that checked, it'll automatically snap to this corner. Snap to this corner. I let it go. And so this is my comic page. This is all the live area. And the purple is out of bounds, let's say. Out of bounds and inside the live area. So now I want to bring in a test page. So File, Import. Again, that's File, Import, Image. And usually I try to keep all my stuff organized, and I have a demonstration page, which is page 1, which we did last week. Open that, size it to the size of this 11 by 17 page. All right, once it's sized, now let's start making borders. So go back to U as the shortcut. So cut frame into folders. Divide frame into folders is what I use. And I start making horizontal and vertical gutters to break up this whole page into panels. I hold down Shift, and that just made a horizontal gutter. But let's do the rest of them. Horizontal, hold down Shift if I want to lock it. If I don't hold down Shift, it'll spin. That gutter will spin. So I hold down Shift, the gutter. I usually go horizontal first and then vertical second. So now, vertical gutters. Boom, boom, and boom. All right. So now we have on our far right all these panels that have now been divided. And you can see there's this black with the white. The white is where your panel actually is. So I collapse all of it. And then usually I move them into sequential order. So from top left to bottom right. And so I put all the panels in their proper place. But I think for today, I just need these top three as an example. If you want to change your gutters, go to Clip Studio Paint and then Preferences. Under Preferences, there's Layer and Frame. And here in the frame border is vertical gutters and horizontal gutters. My vertical gutters I have as 120.00 pixels. Horizontal gutters is 150.00 pixels. But you can change this, you can tinker with it, play with it, and modify it to how you wish. So let's talk about text. And we'll go over all of this more in depth as we actually more refine the pages, and we'll have to do this later on, but I'm just giving a short demonstration on text. Also on the far left is the A, and that is your text. Shortcut is T. Hit the T or hit this button, and that is your text. We're in the proper panel. Touch where you want to make your text, and then type. Body check. And now there's three little icons below where you just typed. There's this pencil where you can modify your lettering size. So for example, the size is 12, and let's say I want to go for an 8. It's in Web Letter BB Regular, which I got from Blambot for free. It was a free download. There's also paid text that you can pay for and use, but this is just a demonstration and whatnot. But I do that, and you can save all settings as default. But again, this is just demonstration. And there is your text. But also you can change the size by adjusting the box that is in. So there are, of course, different ways of doing things. But for the word balloons is just below the A. The shortcut is T, so you hit T twice. T twice, balloon tail, and then there's stop balloon tail. Use balloon tail, rounded balloon. I'm sorry. What am I doing? First, you got to make the balloon before you can make the tail, of course. So rounded balloon tail, there's an ellipse balloon tail, curved balloon tail. Let's do two different examples. First, the rounded balloon tail. Touch that, and then make the balloon. With the O, you can adjust it. Also, if you, is it? Yeah. O for the object. And you can move the text around to center it. O again. And you can adjust how it sits. Now for the balloon tails. Balloon tails, T twice. And then go down to balloon tail. Balloon tail. Touch within the box. In the box. And you can touch and hold if you want to move the tail. And then double tap if you want to end it. But let's do that again. T for the text. Touch where you want to type. Okay. Got all of the fingers and toes. All right. Again, I can adjust with the pencil the size. But again, this is just a demonstration. Hit the check mark to OK. OK, if you want to move it within the panel. And double T, hit T twice as a shortcut. Or you can go to the side, touch the icon. Rounded balloon, well, let's do ellipse balloon. Ellipse balloon is what I usually use the most. Ellipse balloon, make your ellipse. It doesn't have to be perfect as of yet. So we have our balloon, hit the O, and we can adjust from here. And you want it to where it encompasses the text, but there's not too much and not too little on all sides. You can hit the text itself, move the text around inside the frame. I could also change the frame if I want to. Got all fingers and toes. Move that. And let's make that tail. Hit T twice, double tap T, go to balloon tail, and then touch inside the balloon, and then double tap outside for where you want the balloon tail to end. It could be short, it could be long, but we want it generally moving towards the character's who's speaking's mouth. So double tap, and there you have your balloon tail. And so that was a short demonstration on paneling and text balloons and tails. And we'll go more in depth as we get closer to the final, when we actually have to do all of this for real in the proper setting, when we have our inks done. But this was just a short demo. So let's move on to penciling, page 2. All right, so last week we went over and made page 1 And I went through the steps of how I take it from a very, very rough thumbnail, which is what I call this, which is just the briefest bare bones information with text written in of what I want on a page. And this is page 1. And I went from this to a more tightened up pencils. Well, I still call it a rough sketch version, and then to a more developed sketch version, which has some indication of the frame borders. And we did that last week, and that was page 1. Today we're going to be doing page 2. So let's get started. So my layer setup is I have the character designs on top as reference when I'm drawing, just in case I need a refresher to keep my characters on model. I can turn that off. I have text that I would have typed in just as a placeholder and to know where the text and what the text is. I have background pencils for my backgrounds. I have my pencil version, very well, to build up on what is below it, which is the thumbnail version. The thumbnail version is on top of a brought in template of a basic comic page, just so I know where my trim, my bleed lines, my live lines, my live areas, and those are my layers. So now let's get started. So I have my thumbnail version. I'm going to keep this and duplicate it. Create layer, turn this one off, turn on the pencil layer, and then there's a button that says combine to layer below. I hit that and it'll bring that pencil layer, blend that with this other layer below it. And I'll now name that pencils. And this is my new pencil layer. And now that I have this, I can erase what I don't want. And I don't want this thing. So eraser, I have the kneaded eraser, but there's a hard, a soft, a kneaded. I use the kneaded eraser the most often. I'm using a pen tablet. So with my pressure, I can get rid of lines that I don't want. All right, let's clean this up a little bit. And I do a little cleanup before I get started. And now I can get back to hit P twice, which is a shortcut for the pencil. Hit it once, it's the pen tools, the G pen, and it makes like a pen, but I don't want that. I want the pencil, so I hit it again, and I'm using the design pencil right now. I could use the real pencil or a darker pencil, but in the beginning, I'm just using the design pencil. All right, so now we have the initial sketch was what we first did, and the block-in phase, and we collapsed those two things down into this new pencil layer. And now we're going to block it all in again, but better this time. This is where I do a lot of the construction, where I do a lot of ideas on facial expressions, costuming. I usually do it at this layer, this level, this phase, before I then move on. So it's much like what I've done before, is just plussing it. We're adding to the initial ideas, building upon those. It's much easier to build off of something when there is something instead of just, I don't know, and then trying to draw a whole drawing and then going on to the next drawing and trying to make a whole drawing. I try to make it in phases. So again, they don't have to be the most well-defined, the most artistically beautiful images. Again, we're trying to get it down. Just get it down. And then we'll worry about the rest in subsequent phases. I often look at the the character designs, refer back to them often because I can drift off script and go into, this doesn't look anything like the character that I'm supposed to be drawing. So I try to keep that in mind. There's just a lot of little things I try to keep in mind at this phase. So I usually bounce all around the character, erasing and penciling, erasing and penciling. Now, Bunny is the key character of this page. So usually when there is a key character or key image, something that you want the audience to focus on the most of all the images or all the panels on a page, I usually spend the most time with that aspect, that character, that image, whether it's an establishing shot or a character shot. I always try to think of what is the most important thing on the page that I want to come across to the audience, and try to make that the focus. So there's a lot of erasing and repenciling, which I think is one of the best ways for me, because I'm always trying to think of, okay, is this the best pose? Is this the best for this page? Is this the best character drawn? Is this the best? Can I show a different action that would be more in line with what is being said on the page or the activities on the page? Whatever it is, I'm trying to think of how to make it better. So for example, this laughing one, to go from a thinking to a laugh to a bold proclamation in the next beautiful beast kiss image. I'm trying to think of all of this sequentially and how to make it read better, more engaging for the audience, all of that. There's a lot of thought going on. Even if sometimes the audience will look at it for maybe 2 minutes, maybe, but usually the audience can move through dialogue images really quickly, and then they're on to the next page. But you, as the artist, have to think about all of this. But I think it's good to learn. It's a really good way to learn for myself, and I enjoy it. It's engaging artistically to try to think of the story, how to move the characters through the story, how to move the characters from panel to panel, all of it. I enjoy all of it. Now it's time to make this thing look like an actual comic page. So now I'm isolating the characters, moving the characters around, thinking about where their text placement, how can I make this page flow better. So with the text, does it read? Can it be improved? Can the character's positioning situation be, and also overall page flow. And then I start to add thoughts on framing or paneling, like where there's these guides on top that show you where the gutters will be. And so I just make these single lines to indicate comic gutters and how it's going to impact the whole flow. And can the audience realize that this is the first panel, second panel, third panel? Does it flow? Does it read? And so I try to think of all of that. And I like how Bunny and Beautiful Beast Kiss kind of pop out from the frame or in front of the frame. So yeah, I'm trying to use all these principles to make the page, make the art look better. And also that Bunny is standing on a cliff that looks like a wave. And since the moon and tide is connected, I thought that was a pretty nice way of showing that she's above Beautiful Beast Kiss, standing on this hill, but also the hill looks like, and also it has a crescent or a moon-like shape. I like that. So there's a lot of things you can do design-wise or thought-wise in the making of a graphic novel, comic book, or even just an illustration that needs to be thought about. And anytime you can find a way that makes sense to you and also be kind of cool for the audience, whether they catch on or not, it's always nice to think about. So once that paneling is done, or just thoughts on the paneling and framing, I go back in, and now everything's blocked in. There is some structure to the characters, and now I can flesh it out just a bit more. If there's things that is off, I try to correct those, thinking more again about the structure underneath before I put on the costuming, and dealing with hair and all the details that'll come later phases. But right now I'm just trying to block in, get these characters solidly in the space, some costuming. It's starting to shape up at this level. Still a lot of work to be done, but it's starting to look like how I think it should look like. The characters being outside of the frame, I can do that by drawing them and inking them separately, and then separate from the page, and then putting them on top of the page when it's done. And that would make it look like they're standing just slightly above, because they're on a separate layer above the framing. And I experiment and try things whenever possible, because as you go through making your comic, you're learning things all the time, and it's like a puzzle, and you're trying to solve, and things that you didn't know, like a puzzle piece comes into place, and you're like, oh, okay, I can do this way, and so you're figuring everything out on the fly, which is pretty fun. But it's also like you're not exactly sure if this will work, but you got to try. If it doesn't work, you'll just adapt and try it a different way the next time. And again, it's the same principle where erase and then redraw, erase and redraw. That's all my tight pencils are, but I'm glad I have something structurally to build off of. Even if I wind up totally changing the panel, just having an idea about where it could be, or what is happening and what can happen. So I thought about extending Bunny's arm to make it look like she's more pointing at Beautiful Beast Kiss, as these frames look like they're almost on the same level, but in a sort of accusing, who are you? But I thought that might have been maybe a bit too aggressive, because they're more similar in personality than some of the other characters. Again, you're just making it on the fly. You're adapting to, it's like, okay, or trying things, experimenting, and if it doesn't work, you try something else, and you're like, okay. And one thing you'll notice, or one thing I have noticed, is that the characters will always, well, not always, but the more you draw a character, the easier it feels for you to draw that character. So not only do you get faster, they look more in line with what you're thinking, and more or less they're better drawings at the end than at the beginning. So I try to work with that, in that I know that when I start the comic, the characters will look better by the end of the comic. And sometimes you might want to touch up the beginning pages, or say when I ink, I usually start from page 3 and 4 and then go through the whole book and then go back to 1 and 2, because I've learned a lot in the process, and going back to the first one, your art and inking is much cleaner, much better. Just something to think about. All right, so now let's recap and then sunset this thing. So today we went over page 2 of the comic. And so I always start with just getting the idea out. Doesn't have to be pretty at all. Just get the idea out. And so I make this very loose drawings with written in text, just to get an idea. And then from that, we draw on top of that to more define the figures. We might change things around and all of that to make it closer to what we see as the final image. But this is like the midpoint. And then after that, we try to make it look like an actual comic book page. So we have our frame ideas, our paneling ideas, we've typed out our text, and it looks, in general, much better from where we started in the beginning. And that is my tight penciling process. So now let's look at the schedule. All right, so this is wrapping up week 6. And we did comic layout, text, and also penciling for page number 2. Next week will be week 7, and we're going to do some more tools. And actually, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do. We'll figure it out with the program Clip Studio Paint, or just anything in general that I can think of for my penciling phase. And the week after that is the milestone, where we take all those tighter pencils and put them in order and take a look at it, the whole thing. And that is on the schedule for week 7. So that ends another episode. Thank you for joining me. I have been Trey Hodges. You can find my work at treyhodges.com. Power to all the creators, and I will see you on next week's video. Take care, keep shining. Bye.